Everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? All right. Well, welcome everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time out of an amazing, beautiful day in October. But I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and discuss our hopeful building project. I want to recognize a few school committee members that are here. We have Greg Noyes in the back from Amesbury. We have Sandy Copinger from Amesbury, Dick Early from Haverhill, and Brett Murphy from Newburyport. So I just really want to thank you again for coming. So this has been an ongoing, oh, they upped my mic. This has been an ongoing discussion we've had for quite a few years. This building is over 50 years old. And as you can tell, as I spoke to an alumnus from 1989, nothing really has changed, especially in this room. And things really need to get up to code. And most of our systems are really suffering, heat, air conditioning, those kinds of things. So part of the process is with MSBA is to send a statement of interest that we're interested in looking at a building project here at Whittier. That has been going on for, I think we sent 5 or 6 before we finally were invited into the eligibility stage. And we were invited into the eligibility stage in December 2019. So here we are in October 2022. We've been lucky that we've been able to do a lot of our own construction here at Whittier because we have our trades right here in the school. But we have been told under no certain circumstances are we allowed to do any more construction here in the building until we put in a sprinkler system. Because the code is that you have to have a sprinkler system after so much construction. So our building inspector and our fire department has told us at this point, we are done. We are tapped out with doing any kind of construction here in the building. Again, we've been lucky to do a lot of the construction here on our own. We did an allied health center. We did the HVAC program and part of welding. And we've been able to do guidance and we've been able to switch shops on our own as far as areas. So we started this process again about 7 years ago. We went to all of our communities to set up a stabilization account. So that would be able for us to hopefully be able to pay for most of this as we've been saving. And that we started 7 years ago, and each of our communities has supported that stabilization account. So we did not have to go to our communities again and ask for funding for this program. So at this point, I would like to meet the team that is helping us with this project. We again started in December 2019 in eligibility. In July of 2021, we were invited into the feasibility part of the program. In January 2022, we chose left field and as our OPM, and then May 2022, JCJ became our architects. So here again, you can see the Whittier Tech School Committee and then the Whittier Tech School Building Committee. It is made up of community members, the school building committee is made up of administrators, and we tried to make sure there was a representative from each of our 11 communities. Oops, see, shouldn't do that. I'd like to introduce you to our team. So our owner's project manager is Dave Sandin. There's Dave. And then JCJ, our architects, Doug Roberts, Alicia Caratano, James LaPasta, and the other members are not here. So I'm going to turn it over now to David.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm David Sandin. I work for Left Field. I am the project executive for the Whittier Tech project, the owner's project manager, the OPM. I'm going to talk a little bit about the MSBA process, the timeline, the milestones, and then JCJ will walk everyone through the existing conditions and the site conditions analysis that they performed. They will then talk about an update with the educational visioning, as well as the site options and where we are. And then we'll talk about next steps. So, excuse me. This is much better for me. So with the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, they've been in existence since 2004, 2005. They're a quasi-independent agency under the Treasury, and the Treasury obviously under the Commonwealth. And their mission is to work in conjunction, in partnership with local districts, school districts, regional school districts, and provide funding through reimbursement to the districts to design and build educationally cost-effective, sustainable, and educationally appropriate schools. That being said, they have 9 modules, as we see on the screen. The modules that I identified in bold red have already been completed. As Maureen indicated, they've gone through the eligibility period. Forming the project team was earlier this year. And the team has done a lot of work with the district, and that's what we're here tonight for the first forum. And within the feasibility study, module 3, we're a third of the way through. Doug Roberts from JCJ will talk about the process, but high level at this phase, we're looking at all different options. We're then going to be funneling those options to a few and then eventually one. We will then go into a robust schematic design. We will be securing project funding in the spring of 24. And no matter what project or solution we end up picking, because we don't know what solution is going to be selected yet, the earliest construction will commence will most likely be the spring of 2025, because I know a lot of people here are probably just wondering, how much is it going to cost? And when are you going to start? And when are you going to finish? We don't have all those answers right now, but we will. So from a milestone standpoint, you can see Maureen indicated that there's been 5 years of submissions, applications to the MSBA. I can tell you that some school districts have submitted 10 years of applications. Some have submitted 15. They have never been invited in. Just to be invited into the MSBA pipeline process is a gift. The forming of the project team happened earlier this year. We are here. We're about 2 to 3 weeks away from submitting the preliminary design program. We will then be moving forward into the preferred schematic report, a robust schematic design. At the conclusion of the schematic design, we will know obviously the scope, the solution, the schedule, and the cost. And then for our third graphic, which apologies that a lot of this is very duplicative, but we know that everyone kind of sees things in different lens and a different vision. We wanted to kind of show out the timeline in a conventional calendar format. So the first phase, which we are in the preliminary design program, we're a couple weeks away from submitting this to the MSBA. We will then move forward into focusing the solutions that we narrowed down to one solution. That will happen at the conclusion of the preferred schematic report, a robust schematic design, approvals within the 11 member communities, and then depending on the solution, then we will work forward to breaking ground. At this point, I'm going to pass this over to Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, David. On the screen, you see from left to right the 3 deliverables that MSBA has defined. It's a very deliberate and well-established protocol that they've established for parity and equity throughout the Commonwealth. They are a funding partner for the district and the 11 communities. So what they want to make sure is that is a very deliberate and thoughtful approach to arriving at the correct solution for the future of Whittier Tech. As David mentioned, we are currently in what is called the preliminary design program phase, where we reach out to the public, we work with the district, we work with the faculty and staff, understand what your vision is for the future for Whittier. In addition to that, in a parallel path, the district is developing an educational program which defines how they want to deliver education in the next 5 years and into the future. Equally, our design team is on the path, and you'll hear later in the presentation, evaluating existing conditions. And then we're also tasked with finding what is the right site. That all folds into the preliminary design program deliverable that, as David said, will go into MSBA in about 2 to 3 weeks. What's unique with the Whittier project is the site that we're evaluating is the current property that we're on. You have significant amount of acreage, and there are a number of possible building sites. So, as David mentioned, we want to have the most appropriate, sustainable, cost-effective, and educationally appropriate solution to move forward. Part of the challenge also that MSBA tasks us to evaluate are the code upgrade of the existing building. It becomes a baseline. Large point that the statement of interest was accepted is your current classroom configurations don't meet the MSBA guidelines. So it's very seldom that a code upgrade solution is actually advanced, but that's part of our due diligence. In addition, you'll hear later in the presentation about renovation and addition options, as well as new construction. The school building committee will evaluate a number of criteria to determine which is the most appropriate solutions to advance into the next phase, which is the preferred schematic report. Again, for consistency throughout the process for MSBA, whether it's in the Whittier Tech District or other communities, we also will be tasked with evaluating a code upgrade, renovation addition, and new construction project. At the end of the PSR phase, as David mentioned, the committee will arrive at their preferred schematic design solution, which we then will embark in a very detailed development of that design so that we can identify the project costs and project schedules that then factor into the negotiations for the project funding agreement. With that, I'll turn it over to Alicia.
So as Maureen said, my name is Alicia Caratano and I'm the project manager for JCJ. And over the summer, JCJ and our team of engineers and specialty consultants spent the time doing existing condition surveys of both the site and the buildings. And those studies and investigations resulted in a survey which shows the topography and utilities, and it also resulted in reports for each discipline, structural engineers, mechanical, a long list, and right down to things like hazardous materials. And then we looked at both the deficiencies in the building in terms of repair, as well as the code noncompliance relative to current codes. So the other thing that we looked at was to identify additional investigations that we'll be doing in future phases of the project. So as Maureen nicely summarized, that the building is 50 years old, being built in the early 70s, the building is really tired and past its useful life. And although the Whittier Tech team has done a highly commendable job of both maintaining, repairing, and adapting the building, it's no longer conducive to a 21st century vocational education. So these are the plans that we developed, and these will be used as the baseline for the design options that will be talked about later in the presentation. So the existing site and building has conditions that do not comply with current accessibility codes for either the Massachusetts Accessibility Code or the National ADA Code. And so in spite of that, the school has done a great job of making reasonable accommodation to provide accessibility. And these photos indicate some existing non-compliant conditions in both the site and the building. One of them is in this auditorium that we're in right now, we don't have an accessible route or accessible seating that meets current codes. The exterior envelope, the brick, is in need of repair and cleaning, and also is not comprised of a composition that meets the current energy codes. Other examples of things that we've found were there are several areas in the building that are comprised of what are called connected stories without the fire separation and smoke separation required in current building codes. And then another example would be that the wire glass that is in the building is not impact resistant per current code. So in addition to these technical issues, there are other things, that less tangible things, that affect the educational delivery of the project and makes it a challenge to get good educational outcomes that the building could help facilitate. So examples of this are the original building was what was called an open plan design, and many of the areas did not have surrounding walls. This resulted in some challenges, such as acoustical challenges in the library, which is exacerbated by the fact that due to overcrowding and lack of space, there are temporary partitions. You can see the gray cubicles that make for lack of acoustical privacy. Another thing is there's daylighting challenges, and that there are many internal classrooms, both academic and vocational, that do not have natural daylight. So lastly, as people have been, Maureen and others have spoken about, the systems here are old and they're tired and they're in need of replacement. The heating, the plumbing, the electrical, and all of these things do not meet current codes. So another big issue that Maureen mentioned is the lack of a sprinkler system that is required under current code. And finally, besides the technical issues, these buildings don't meet the energy code and are inefficient and costly to run.
Thanks, Alicia. My name is Jim LaPasta with JCJ Architecture. I'm a design principal. We're going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about how we get from understanding the conditions that are here, which we've talked about, to what the vision for the future might be and what could eventually be a new or renovated school. As Doug mentioned, one of the things that's fundamental to this entire process for the MSBA is that this project, whatever is built, ultimately fulfills the educational mission of the district. So they require an educational plan. To do an educational plan, it's important that we hold a series of listening or visioning events, which we've done over the summer. So there were a series of workshops held with a educational consultant that was part of our team as well, David Stephen, who happens to be an educational consultant. He's a former VOTEC teacher, as well as an architect. So he's a nice combination of skills, and he does this for districts throughout the Commonwealth. So as you can see, okay, push the right button. Yep, there we go. So as you can see, there were a series of workshops held, beginning with a kickoff meeting. Then we had meetings with large groups. Almost all of these were held online, as our world is nowadays. Ultimately, in the last, there was an in-person teacher workshop that we held here on site just before, I think it was the day before school opened. This was a chance to go through a series of exercises to both look at what is happening now, but more importantly, plan for the future. Because whatever gets done here will need to last another 50 years. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can do to understand how education may change over the course of the future. So one of the exercises that we went through with all of these groups was to talk about what we call design patterns. And these are looking at things that would be the kinds of spaces that would be useful, desirable, helpful in a new building. The groups identified these as the top 10. Security and welcome. So how do you balance those? How do you have a very secure school while still welcoming the community, welcoming students, making them feel like they belong? Flexible and adaptable classrooms. This building has needed to adapt over the years to a lot of different programs. We know that in technical education, programs are going to come, programs are going to go, and we need to make sure that the building adapts to that over time, but also needs to adapt kind of week to week to the needs of the building. Natural light was important. There's not a lot of it in this building, except for a few areas, professional work areas and storage. Clearly important to make sure things can work. Something called the heart of the school. I'm not going to go through all of these, which is how do you know when you're here? How do you know where the center of the building is? How do you form a community? How do you make sure that students can see each other in a safe and secure way? The teachers get to know students. How can architecture help that? And we talked about a welcoming arrival. So these were really the top 10 out of probably 40 or 50 different patterns that were looked at, discussed, voted on. This isn't the final be all and end all, but it's a way to help inform the building design as it moves forward. We also spent a lot of time discussing guiding principles. We're not going to go through all of these either, but this is a way to understand not just the nuts and bolts of the building, but what are the aspirations? What are the things that when you come to work every day, when you come to school every day, should be guiding us? And there are things that I think the best one was, we're Whittier Tech. This is a special place, and we need to hang on to what's special about Whittier Tech as we go through this process. This isn't any other building, any other place, so we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. Thinking and doing is how students learn here. We want to create spaces that are important in that way, that support that mission. Adaptable, flexible evolution. We talked about how education is going to change. The new or renovated building has to accommodate that. We want to focus on career pathways. That's what this place is all about, making sure students are career and college ready when they leave. A heart of the school we talked about, some place where when you arrive, you feel like you've actually arrived at the building, and to give a center, like a community square for the school. Indoor-outdoor connections. You've got a beautiful site here, lots of opportunity for outdoor learning, lots of opportunity for working outside, trades work outside, maybe we could think about ways to enhance that learning environment using the site. And then finally, school is a community resource. For the 11 communities that are here, how can we make sure that this building functions in a way that supports all 11 communities and gives access to and support for functions that may be needed? So these were the guiding principles. When we worked with the teachers, we talked about guiding principles. We talked about their needs. We also talked about their blue sky ideas for what could be in a school. These are just ways to get ideas out on paper. These are actual teacher sketches that they shared with us, so that we could begin to have all of this information to inform this next couple of years as we move forward. All of that has to get applied to your site. So as we begin to look at that, this is the property again in terms of the site scope. It's pretty big, so you think there's a lot of places to build. This should be pretty easy. But when you begin to analyze it, you find that there are some limitations on the site, and that's what we're going to talk about. So to start with, the way the site currently works, there are lots of traffic issues. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know if you come to the site regularly. Parking issues, traffic issues, issues of how you get in and out of the site. But more importantly for the construction project is you've got a lot of hills here, a lot of topography. One of the things about a building project is if you can stay away from the hills, you're going to save money. And so we want to analyze the most buildable sites on the campus, either for an addition or for new construction. So this just gives you some idea of the slope that you have. Oops, I went back. There we go. So this just gives you some idea. There's a 90-foot grade change in this part of the site, 130 feet from top to bottom. Pretty level over the ball fields are, relatively level where the school currently is. So there's a 40-foot depression here and a 40-foot hill here. So there's lots of interesting things going on. We can build anywhere, but it costs money and it takes time. So how do you do this in the most efficient way so that we're maximizing the taxpayer dollars and making a really good school? So we started to look at things like buildable area. And the areas in yellow really are those areas that would be the most cost effective to build and really the easiest to build on. And the orange is sort of somewhere in between. And everything else is either very hilly or a wetland. So while there's a lot of acreage here and it's really beautiful, there isn't necessarily a whole lot of room to put a big building and a lot of parking. So we need to make sure we look at a variety of options. And that's what this is about. As Doug talked about, the MSBA has a very good process for, in fact, better than almost any other state in the country, for going through options and making sure you've kind of uncovered everything. Really evaluated all the options. Do they meet the educational program? Can they be built? What's the schedule? What are they going to cost? And then you can pick the best one that balances all of these. So this is a matrix of the options that have been put forward initially. As David mentioned, we're starting with a lot of options. All of them are plausible, could be built, and we'll be narrowing these eventually down to a single option that would then be moved forward. So the first option is a code upgrade. And you'll see two lines here, 1,280 students and 1,400 students. When the district was invited into the program, they were asked to look at two different enrollments. So we'll be looking at two different enrollment options. At some point, there'll be a decision made as to which of those two enrollments will move forward as well. So that's why there's kind of a matrix of options here. So if you look at the code upgrade, this is simply taking this building, upgrading all the codes, fixing all the things that Alicia talked about. And at the end of the day, it still will only fit the 1,280 students. You can't squeeze 1,400 in here. That's why that box is gray. So that's not really an option if you want 1,400 students. You just can't fit them in the current building. And when you're done, what you'll have is a code compliant 1970s building, because you don't do anything else under this option. This is a baseline that the MSBA will be asking us to look at. Then there's a column for renovation addition. So there's four options that we'll go through some of those options in terms of where would you renovate this building and add to it in order to make it work. And then there's options for doing new construction as well. So if we look at the first renovation addition option, what you see here on the left in all of these will be a site plan in white. That's the existing building where we are now. There's the new stadium. The entry drive is here coming in from the right-hand side. And I'm sorry, that's on the left. On the right, this is what we call a stacking diagram. It's a very simple floor plan kind of exploded to show where various things might be located. So the first option, which is for renovation addition, is to build a new addition out in the front of the school. So in the reddish color, you'd have a new VOTEC addition, you'd have a new main entry, you'd have a new auditorium, and then this auditorium, this space would be renovated into other functions. We would redo the bus drop so that it would come around the right side as you drive into the site. Buses would go to the right, you'd have a bus drop, and the parent drop would be off here to the left. So there'd be renovations to the drives and to the parking, and a new guard shack in this area. I'm sorry. Out in the back here where it says future expansion, one of the other things that the MSBA asks us to look at is, okay, after 50 years, where would you build the next addition? So you don't want to build something now that can't ever be expanded in the future. So that on all of these, you'll see an area marked for future expansion. So in this option, you would do that future expansion off the back where the courts currently are. We've listed a series of pros and cons here that you can certainly read. These are also, for those of you here, there's boards out in the lobby that you can kind of look at in more detail, and this will all be put on the website that's available for everyone to look at in more detail. So this is what the building would look like under this configuration. The only difference between the two options for the 1,400 versus the 1,200 plus students is that you have an extra floor up here. So you'd add one more floor of classroom space. Otherwise, it's essentially the same building because the rest of the program would be about the same. Another renovation addition option is to build off the back. So you'd put a new addition, new auditorium off the back of the building. You can see the future expansion. You would do a similar bus drop. You would do a similar parent drop. This would allow you to stage the building off the back. And again, similarly, you end up with an extra floor for the 1,400 student option. So this would be the renovation addition option. One of the things about a renovation addition under either of these is that you would build the new addition first, move students into that in a kind of phased over time way, and then renovate this area of the building, then move students there, then renovate this area, then move them there, renovate this area, move them there. So in all the renovation addition options, the phasing of how you would do the construction will also be something we look at, because that will impact the cost, the duration of how long it would take to do it, and of course, the daily lives of teachers and students and parents and community members who are on site during construction. So that'll be part of the conversation, part of the evaluation. The first new option to look at is to build a completely new building on the far side of the stadium. So we're currently here. In this case, you would build a new either 1,200 or 80 or 1,400 student school, again, with one extra floor at the front. Completely new building, all new facilities, roughly laid out with everything in a series of small courtyards that would allow for some outdoor learning, some outdoor trades. You could build houses out there. You could do outdoor work in those courtyards and have outdoor academics perhaps on one side. Customer entry for the Poets Inn and the other forward-facing activities where you want people to come in the building, but you don't want them to come all the way in the building. We would, in this case, put in a new road around the school for buses. So buses would come around, be able to turn and come back out. Parents and visitors would come to the left. So you'd have a complete separation under a new scenario of buses and parents. We would relocate all of the bus parking, bus maintenance, storage down to the more or less the southern end of the site. And then after the school building is built, which would be first, and everyone moves from the old building to the new, then the next phase of construction would be to tear down this building and build a new set of ball fields in that area. And while there is topography here, you could step these fields down in a series of terraces and have a series of ball fields. And right now we're showing a couple of soccer fields, softball and baseball fields in those areas, parent drop, visitor parking, and then of course, future expansion in an area here where there's currently a little bit of a hill. And then the last option that we're going to be reviewing and looking at is another new building option. This is a completely new building as well, but it's a courtyard. So it's a different configuration. It will serve different, it'll serve education differently. It's a different layout. So that the teachers and the principal will have a different way of working in this particular building. It has a single large courtyard in the middle, which may have acoustic issues, but also provides a place for outdoor activity and construction. Future expansion goes off the backside here. And the site is pretty much the same as the last option we looked at, as is the idea that you would add one more layer of academic space in order to make it a 1,400 student school. So this option, you would build this entire new building first, move everyone over, come back and do all the fields. So the phasing is a little simpler in new construction than it is in a renovation, but phasing nonetheless. And again, a series of pros and cons as we've identified them, but the building committee and the administration will of course be looking at this in more detail, and you can look at this either outside or on the website. So those are at a very high level, the options. I think we're going to be able to take some questions now, correct? Is that acceptable, or is there someone else? No, I saw a question. I want to make sure I'm okay to go ahead and do that. All right. Yes, sir. You had a question in the back. So the question was, I'll repeat the question just so folks can hear it. The question was, the understanding is that the current building is about 350 square feet, 350,000 square feet. It's 356,000 square feet, but about 350, yes. What's our final square footage? We're at 447. I want to get the number right. It was like 415. It's a little over 400,000 square feet for the 1,400 student version. No,
Okay, so for the 1280.
Yeah.
It's 396, 285.
396, 285 for the 1280 students. And I can't read that. And a little over 400,000 for 417. 417,000. And one of the reasons it's bigger, as I think Alicia mentioned, all of the classrooms and spaces currently in this building are undersized relative to current MSBA standards for funding. So when you take all of those and just increase them, you start with a bigger building, then you add more students and you end up with more square footage. The question was, or the observation was, it may be cheaper to build, the cost per student may be cheaper for a bigger building than a smaller building. That's part of what we're going to be looking at. We'll be looking at the cost per square foot, which could of course be then translated to a cost per student. That may be the case, but it may not, depending on the situation, but those numbers will be available to everybody as we go through this process. Do we have other questions about what we've shared? Yes, sir.
Carbon footprint for the building. Thank you.
Oh, great.
But I think it's extraordinarily important that the building be designed to be net zero, to have a net zero carbon footprint. The state is pushing that. There's a goal for 2050 for all buildings in the state to meet that standard. And I live in West Newbury. Pentucket just completed a new high school, and it's an extraordinary building. It's a great building. In my mind, the one thing that's lacking is that it's using natural gas for heat. And because of MSBA standards regarding funding, when the building was designed and built, there wasn't an opportunity, as I understand, to look at something like ground source heat pumps for heating. That has to be done for a new building here. The building has to be built to future standards, to meet future energy needs. So that's, otherwise everything looks good so far, but I just felt that needs to be a baseline.
Yeah. We do have sustainability consultants on board. We will be evaluating all of those options. One of the challenges I'll just share of doing a net zero building in a vocational environment has to do with some of the programs, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just requires a little more thought. We just are finishing a vocational high school in Bridgeport, Connecticut, starting construction. The state wanted to do net zero. They were unable to make it a fully net zero, but it is certainly a reduced carbon, reduced fossil fuel building. Part of it had to do with the culinary arts program and some of the need to burn fossil fuels for some of the programs on site. But
Yeah.
it's definitely something that's high on the list of things that the MSBA is interested in, and we'll be reporting to them on the various options as well.
Right. And I understand, that sort of traditionally, gas has been used, say, for culinary programs. There are inductions. I mean, there are alternatives.
There absolutely are.
And I guess, personally, I'll make a lot of noise if I don't hear it going that direction, because it should be a grave concern to all of us.
Mhm.
Thanks.
I would
Good.
just add to that part of our responsibility is looking at life cycle cost.
Yeah.
When we get into the detailed schematic design, our engineers will be looking at that, as Jim mentioned, working with our sustainability consultant, because one of the missions of MSBA was a sustainable design.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question back here, ma'am. Did you have a question? You had your hand up before?
My question concern was exactly the same as
Okay.
this gentleman's, but I do have another question.
Sure.
Currently, what's your estimate of how much MSBA will share of the cost? What's the percentage?
So the current reimbursement rate for eligible project costs right now is 59.16%. Once we will go through the process with the MSBA, we have the ability to have some incentive points. Meeting a certain green initiatives criteria will end up with 2 additional points. There's additional points for the maintenance that Whittier Tech has done. So that 59.16 will go up. If it's a renovation option, you also have more reimbursement points because it's a renovation. So we don't know what the final rate will be. It will probably be in the range of anywhere from 67% to 63%, but that is on eligible costs only. Not all project costs are eligible. The MSBA has a formula that they look, or a criteria, and there's certain costs that are categorically ineligible. There are other costs that are eligible, but they are caps that are established for certain costs that are eligible. So you might have a reimbursement rate of 65%, but the effective reimbursement rate at the end of the day could be in the 30s, could be 25. It's going to be a range. I hope that answers your question without making it more complicated.
Because I'm on the behavioral school committee, and one of the things that we are dealing with is we are going to build a new school. And one of the problems is that the rate of reimbursement per square foot is set when you submit and get final approval for your plan. And what has happened to us is that rate of reimbursement per square foot is about 50% of the reality. So that really affects the real percentage. So you have to be thinking about what's happening with inflation from the time you submit your plan to the time you actually have it built.
You're 100% correct. Any other questions? Riveting information?
Well, thank you everyone so much for coming out today. Again, a beautiful day, and you decided to come and listen to us talk about the future of Whittier Tech and for the next generation of vocational students. So thank you so much. This is one of many. We're also planning on presenting some of this information at open house and our advisory board. We really want to make sure our community knows what is happening and that you feel like you're a part of this project. So thank you so much for coming. And there's some cookies. We never waste food around here. So thank